What is VO2 Max? I'm sure you've heard the term before. It's all over the fitness industry, but do you actually know what it means? Well, lucky for you, today I'm going to be explaining what it is by using items found around the house. To spice up this explanation a little bit, I've created a wheel of household objects that I'm going to spin, and I'm going to have to use 3 of those objects to explain what VO2 Max is. Without further ado, let's get started. So here we go. I'm going to spin the wheel, and it looks like it's landed on pillow. So that is item number 1. Spinning the wheel again for a second time here. And we've got spoon. And for our final item, I have a notebook. Okay, I've gone and collected the 3 items from the wheel. I have a pillow here. I have a spoon. And I also have a notebook. Now, before I try and force these completely random objects into some kind of explanation, let's quickly define what VO2 Max actually means, because understanding this part will help make these random objects make a little bit more sense. So VO2 Max is simply the maximum amount of oxygen your body can uptake, transport, and use to make energy. The use part there is crucial. We'll get into that later. The V stands for volume and is usually measured in milliliters. The O2 stands for oxygen, and the max stands for maximum. An easy way to remember it is simply read it backwards. So you have maximum, O2, volume. And if you think about your body like an engine, then your VO2 max would be the maximum capacity of your engine. So a higher VO2 max means you can use more oxygen to generate energy, which directly translates to improved performance during exercise. So now the goal is to use these 3 objects, the spoon, the notebook, and the pillow, to help you understand VO2 max and represent each step of oxygen in its journey through our body. So just like an engine, your VO2 max is determined by 3 main factors: the intake, so how much oxygen you can pull into your lungs; the transport, how much oxygen your heart and blood can deliver to your working muscles; and the utilization, so how well your muscles can use that oxygen to make energy. So in this example, the pillow here is going to represent our lungs. It's full of air, full of feathers too. The spoon is going to represent transport, because like when you're eating cereal, you're transporting the food from the bowl into your mouth. So the spoon is going to represent transport of oxygen throughout our body. And this notebook here is going to represent energy use. Now, it's not because this notebook's made out of paper and paper came from a tree and trees absorb CO2. All right, we're not going down that pipeline. The notebook's going to represent energy use in this case. So we're going to pretend that our muscles have the ability to write down their energy use, and this is where they're going to be documenting it. So we'll get to this part a little bit later. All right, now I'm going to use these objects to explain VO2 max. Let's start with step number 1, the intake. How much oxygen can we actually pull into our lungs? So every time you take a deep breath, your lungs expand and they fill with fresh air. Inside of your lungs, that air moves into tiny little sacs where oxygen is absorbed and passed into your bloodstream. In our analogy, this is the pillow. So the bigger your pillow, the bigger your lungs, essentially. But here's the critical part. Simply taking in more air doesn't mean your body can actually use it. You can breathe in giant lungfuls of air, but if your body isn't good at transporting that air to the working muscles and the places that need it, your performance will not improve. This is why having giant lungs, or having a giant pillow in this case, does not automatically make you an athlete. So that is step number 1, intake. Now let's talk about step number 2, transport. Let's start with the spoon. What do you typically use a spoon for? Well, hopefully your answer is transporting food from a bowl or a plate into your mouth. If it wasn't, I'm not sure what you're using spoons for. In this example, it works the same way. The spoon represents how our body is able to transfer and deliver oxygen from the lungs to our working muscles. The bigger the spoon, the more oxygen you can move and deliver to the working muscles. The spoon is a crucial part of what determines your VO2 max number. And for most people, it's actually the most significant factor affecting their VO2 max. We're usually not limited by lung size or by how much air we can breathe in, but by how effectively we can take air from those lungs and transport it to the areas that are requiring it. So in this example, it's not about how big your pillow is, it's about how big your spoon is. You can have giant lungs, but if you can't transport that air to the muscles, it's not going to be useful. Now that you can see how vital oxygen transport is, you can see why your VO2 max is so heavily influenced by how big your spoon is. If you were trying to eat cereal with this little spoon, it's going to take you way longer than if you use this giant one right here. Same thing with your body. If you're trying to transport your oxygen with a tiny little spoon, it's not going to work out too well. In real terms, the size of your spoon is often determined by a combination of factors like your cardiac output, how much blood you can pump per heartbeat, your blood oxygen carrying capacity, so things like hemoglobin levels, red blood cell count, and plasma volume, which determine how much oxygen your blood can transport. It's also determined by your muscle's ability to extract that oxygen once it's at the actual muscle site. So how well your muscles can pull that oxygen out of the blood often depends on your capillary density, enzyme activity, and blood flow distribution. And once that oxygen actually enters the cell, there's tons of other things that matter too, like your mitochondrial density, muscle fiber type, overall training, age, genetics, and stuff like that. I do also want to mention that genetics do play a pretty significant role in your VO2 max by influencing all these different pathways, determining both your starting point and your maximum potential. But don't let that be an excuse not to improve it. If any of the pathways I just listed are weak, your VO2 max will be limited. For example, if you can take in a lot of oxygen, but the spoon you're using to deliver it is very tiny, that's going to be a limiting factor. And the same applies on the other end of the process. If you have a great ability to transport oxygen through your body, but your muscles have a problem uptaking that oxygen, that's also going to be a bottleneck. A good example of this would be somebody who doesn't train much, but they're using blood doping. So in blood doping, you have a very high ability to transport oxygen through your blood, which sure might help this person out a little bit, but their main bottleneck would probably be at the muscle site itself. Since their muscles aren't trained well, they don't have a lot of mitochondria, they can't actually uptake that oxygen. So it's great that there's tons of oxygen flowing through his blood, not great that he's doping, but he's not really able to take advantage of that because there's another bottleneck. So that brings us to step 3 in the process, which is uptake. So how well your muscles can actually use this oxygen that's being delivered. And this is where the notebook comes in. The notebook represents your muscles' ability to write down or take notes on how much energy they're actually creating with the oxygen that they receive. If your muscles have lots of mitochondria and lots of systems to create energy with oxygen, they can fill pages and pages of notebooks very quickly. But if you don't have trained muscles and they don't have the systems in place to create that energy aerobically, so they don't have mitochondria, they don't have high enzyme activity, then even a big spoon delivering tons of oxygen to the muscle won't help much. You simply won't be able to use what's being delivered. And this is why endurance training makes such a big difference. It builds a strong system for filling out your notebooks by increasing mitochondrial density, increasing enzyme activity, and increasing your muscles' ability to extract and use oxygen efficiently. Your VO2 max is basically the score your body receives for how efficiently these 3 steps work together: the uptake, the transport, and the utilization of oxygen. Endurance training can make the pillow more efficient, make the spoons bigger, and help you fill out the notebooks faster. So the next time you hear somebody talking about VO2 max, just remember it's just a pillow, a notebook, and a spoon all working together. If you want to learn more about VO2 max or how endurance training can help improve it, feel free to drop a comment below or check out my website for more information.